Silence is not empty. Silence is loud. When you walk away, you think you left nothing behind. No words, no explanations, no closure. But what you really left was space, and space is dangerous because the mind will fill it day by day. While you are gone, something begins to happen in him. Not because you spoke, but because you didn't. Silence is the most underestimated force on earth. People fear it, avoid it, drown it out with noise, because silence has a way of holding up a mirror no one asked for. When you disappear, the first thing that happens is not understanding, it's confusion. His mind reaches for you the way it always did, out of habit. A message, a voice, a reaction. And when there's nothing there, the brain stumbles. Silence arrives first as discomfort. When you disappear, the noise that once filled his days, the messages, the arguments, the casual check-ins, the background presence suddenly stops. At first, his mind reacts the way it always has. It looks outward for stimulation. It reaches for distractions, routines, habits that once worked. But silence doesn't respond. It doesn't argue back. It doesn't explain itself. And because there is no external sound to latch onto, the mind turns inward. That inward turn is not intentional. It is automatic. Reflection begins not because he wants to think, but because there is nothing left to drown thought out. In the absence of noise, memory steps forward. Small moments he never paid attention to begin replaying themselves. Conversations he half listened to now echo with clarity. Silence gives those moments space to breathe. When everything was loud, there was no room for meaning, only reaction. Now, the quiet stretches time. A single thought lingers longer than it ever did before. He starts noticing patterns, what you gave, what he took for granted, what he avoided addressing. Reflection isn't gentle, it's precise. It doesn't exaggerate, and it doesn't soften the truth. It simply lays things out the way they were, without commentary, without defense. At this stage, resistance shows up. The mind doesn't like being exposed. He may try to fill the silence again. More work, more people, more movement. But reflection has already started rewiring how his attention works. Even when distracted, the thoughts return. Silence has taught the brain to slow down, and once slowed, it becomes harder to ignore what's been uncovered. Reflection doesn't demand answers immediately. It just keeps presenting the same questions in different forms until avoidance becomes exhausting. This is where understanding begins, not emotionally, but cognitively. He starts to see cause and effect more clearly. As days pass, reflection deepens. It moves beyond surface-level memories into motive and intention. He begins asking himself why he reacted the way he did, why certain conversations felt uncomfortable, why change was always postponed. Silence removes the urgency to respond and replaces it with the necessity to understand. Without someone there to interrupt the process, the mind becomes its own witness. He notices the gaps between what he believed about himself and how he actually showed up. That gap, once hidden by mind noise, now becomes impossible to ignore. Reflection also changes how value is perceived. When something is always present, the mind categorizes it as permanent. Silence disrupts that assumption. The absence forces the brain to reevaluate importance. What once felt optional now feels significant. What once felt replaceable now feels specific. Reflection is not nostalgia, it's recalibration. The mind begins ranking experiences differently, assigning weight where it previously assigned convenience. This is not emotional weakness, it's cognitive clarity. Silence sharpens perception by stripping away excess. Over time, reflection becomes integrated. It's no longer just replaying the past, it's reshaping future awareness. He starts recognizing similar patterns in other areas of his life. How he listens, how he avoids, how he delays accountability. Silence trains the mind to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. And once the mind learns to sit still, it becomes capable of growth. Reflection doesn't promise reconciliation, regret, or reunion. It promises understanding. And understanding, formed in silence, is far more powerful than anything noise ever produced. When you disappear, the first thing he notices isn't the emptiness itself, it's the disruption. Life has a rhythm, and every relationship, every presence contributes to that rhythm. The way he woke up, the way he planned his day, the way he made decisions, all of it carried the subtle weight of your existence. The absence suddenly forces the brain to recognize that the patterns it relied on are gone. He may not even realize it at first, but routines begin to feel off. A place at the table is empty. A phone doesn't buzz at the expected hour. Familiar interactions no longer occur. The mind is designed to expect stability. And when patterns are broken, the disruption demands attention. Patterns in the mind are not only about habits, they are about dependency. He depended on your presence for emotional cues, validation, reassurance, and sometimes even for avoidance. These cues, when consistent, train the brain to operate on autopilot. But absence removes the autopilot. Suddenly, every decision, every emotional response is conscious. No longer can he reach for the familiar. He must create new ways of thinking, reacting, and managing the day. This is uncomfortable because the mind resists change. Yet it is necessary because growth only emerges when habitual crutches are removed. The breaking of patterns also exposes vulnerability. He may find himself overthinking the smallest choices, replaying conversations that never needed revisiting, or imagining outcomes he once ignored. This is the brain's way of recalibrating. It begins to test boundaries, exploring what it can manage without the usual support systems. What once felt easy, effortless, or automatic now requires awareness. And while that discomfort is often met with denial or distraction at first, it gradually forces introspection. Patterns aren't just behaviors, they are shields. Their absence leaves him exposed to his own thoughts, feelings, and accountability. Interestingly, absence also challenges assumptions. When someone is always there, the mind forms unspoken agreements about effort, communication, and reciprocity. The absence forces him to confront whether those assumptions were accurate. Did he rely too heavily on your presence? Did he take moments for granted? The broken patterns shine a light on inconsistencies, highlighting behaviors he may have ignored or rationalized. And because patterns affect both action and emotion, their disruption forces a holistic evaluation of self, how he shows up, how he avoids, and how he responds when stability is removed. The brain adapts, even if slowly. As days pass, he begins experimenting with new ways to navigate life without you. He may seek different routines, attempt new habits, or notice internal resources he didn't know he had. Absence is reshaping neural pathways. Every day, the mind practices resilience in real time, adjusting to gaps previously filled by someone else. This is the silent transformation. He is learning to function without reliance on what he once thought was essential. The absence becomes a teacher, and the broken patterns are its lessons. Finally, breaking patterns prepares the mind for deeper awareness. By removing automatic responses, absence encourages conscious thought. He begins noticing emotional triggers, relational tendencies, and hidden insecurities. Patterns that once dulled perception are gone, allowing insight to emerge. Over time, the mind rewires itself around independence and clarity. Absence doesn't just remove presence. It dismantles reliance, reshapes cognition, and forces adaptation. It is in this quiet, often uncomfortable space that real growth begins, unseen but undeniable. When you are gone, memory becomes a persistent echo. It was always there, of course, moments tucked away in the background. But your absence amplifies them. The brain starts replaying conversations, gestures, and even silences that once passed unnoticed. Ordinary days now carry extraordinary weight because the mind no longer has the present to distract it. Every laugh, every word, every glance becomes a reference point, looping in his thoughts like a film that refuses to pause. Memory grows louder not because he chooses it, but because silence and absence demand attention. The intensity of memory is rooted in what was once familiar. When you were present, familiarity created comfort, and comfort created invisibility. He didn't notice details because they were constant. They became part of the backdrop. But absence flips this script. What was once taken for granted now stands out with sharp clarity. Your favorite phrases, the subtle ways you moved, the small sacrifices you made, all of it resurfaces, sometimes painfully, sometimes with longing. Memory doesn't simply recall, it illuminates, highlighting what the mind ignored in the rhythm of daily life. Memory grows not only in clarity, but in frequency. The mind begins to fill the gaps left by absence, sometimes exaggerating, sometimes romanticizing, sometimes analyzing. Even when he tries to distract himself with work, friends, or routine, memory insists on appearing uninvited. It triggers emotions he thought were dormant, forcing him to relive moments with a level of awareness that was impossible when presence was constant. In this way, absence functions as an amplifier. It magnifies the importance of every encounter, every word, every unspoken sentiment, until he can no longer ignore what truly mattered. The louder memories also confront him with his own shortcomings. He starts recalling moments when he was careless, inattentive, or unkind, not as abstract thoughts, but as living reminders of impact. The brain pairs memory with emotion, so the recollection becomes visceral. This is a subtle yet profound form of accountability. Unlike arguments or explanations, which can be dismissed in real time, memory cannot be silenced. Its permanence forces recognition of truths he might otherwise have avoided. Memory grows louder precisely because it carries lessons wrapped in emotion, lessons he cannot skip, hide, or rationalize away. Interestingly, memory also allows perspective to form. As the days pass, repetition of these moments creates patterns in thought. He begins to notice recurring dynamics, cycles of behavior, and the subtle ways you influenced him and the world around him. Memory becomes not just nostalgia, but insight. The mind starts connecting the dots, realizing that what was once background noise actually shaped understanding, choices, and identity. In this sense, absence doesn't just awaken memory. It sharpens it, making it a tool for awareness, reflection, and eventually change. Finally, memory grows louder because it begins to shape the future. Every recollection, every lesson hidden within it informs how he thinks, feels, and behaves moving forward. Absence and silence give the mind the space to replay, analyze, and internalize, building neural patterns that were impossible while presence dominated attention. Memory stops being passive, it becomes active. The echoes of what was, amplified by what is not, teach, challenge, and mold him. And as memory grows louder day by day, the mind gradually rewires itself around the truths it once ignored, setting the stage for accountability, awareness, and transformation. When you disappear, the first line of defense is the ego. The mind hates uncertainty, and the ego refuses to admit vulnerability. At first, he tells himself he is fine. He rationalizes your absence, minimizes its significance, and clings to the illusion of control. It's temporary. She'll come back. Nothing really changed. These are not just words, they are protective mechanisms. The ego shields him from the discomfort of facing reality, from the awareness of loss, and from the need to confront the truths he has long avoided. In those initial days, resistance is strong, and the mind is actively trying to maintain stability at any cost. The ego resists because acknowledgement requires effort. Admitting discomfort, recognizing mistakes, or feeling longing threatens the carefully constructed self-image he has relied on for years. He may have built an identity that avoided accountability, deflected responsibility, or ignored emotional growth. Silence and absence confront that identity head on. The mind struggles at first, seeking distractions, justifications, and rationalizations to avoid the inevitable truth he cannot control what has vanished. Resistance is the ego's way of buying time, delaying growth, and postponing reflection. It fights change because change feels like loss, and the ego cannot tolerate loss willingly. But cracks inevitably appear. The absence persists, and distractions only mask reality temporarily. The mind begins to notice patterns it once dismissed. He catches himself thinking about moments he wished he'd handled differently. He remembers conversations he brushed off, promises he failed to keep, or opportunities he allowed to slip away. The ego, once solid, starts to feel tension. It cannot fully contain the discomfort, and in the quiet of reflection, it begins to fracture. That cracking is subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A pause before a response, a hesitation before a thought, a moment of self-doubt. But it is the beginning of awareness. The cracking of the ego is a necessary stage of transformation. It exposes areas where denial has dominated, showing him the gaps between who he thought he was and who he truly is. In those cracks, self-awareness seeps in. He starts to see the consequences of neglect, the cost of avoidance, and the weight of unspoken words. The ego may resist still, but it can no longer fully suppress recognition. The silence forces a confrontation that is unavoidable. He is compelled to witness the truth about himself, piece by piece, thought by thought. Interestingly, as the ego begins to crack, he experiences discomfort that feels both emotional and physical. Pride, frustration, and stubbornness surface, challenging him to respond differently. Moments of reflection become uncomfortable mirrors, revealing weaknesses and blind spots. And yet, this cracking is also liberating. The ego's rigid defenses begin to soften, making room for insight, humility, and growth. In this way, absence and silence act as pressure. They do not destroy the ego entirely, but they reshape it, forcing it to yield where once it refused. Over time, these cracks deepen, allowing real change to take root. The mind learns that vulnerability is not weakness, that accountability is not punishment, and that absence is not abandonment but opportunity. The ego, once a fortress, becomes a tool for self-reflection rather than a barrier to it. As resistance gives way to acceptance, he begins to engage with himself in ways that were impossible before. And in the quiet aftermath of your disappearance, this fractured ego transforms into the foundation for clarity, growth, and understanding. Once the ego begins to crack, silence makes room for something far more powerful: emotional accountability. When he is alone with his thoughts, without distraction or defense, he begins to confront the truth about his own behavior. This isn't about blaming anyone else or justifying what went wrong. It's about recognizing his role in the story. The quiet doesn't scold or lecture, it simply illuminates. Every action, every word left unsaid, every choice avoided suddenly comes into focus. And in that focus, accountability is born, not as punishment, but as awareness. Emotional accountability thrives in quiet because noise and business often mask reality. When presence dominates life, distractions keep the mind from examining its own patterns. He may have ignored inconsistencies in his behavior, rationalized mistakes, or blamed circumstances. But when silence removes these distractions, the mind can no longer hide. He is forced to face questions he has been avoiding. Did I truly show up? Did I listen when it mattered? Did I act with integrity, honesty, and care? These questions have no immediate answers, but their repetition presses the mind toward reflection. In quiet moments, emotions are no longer fleeting, they are fully felt. Loneliness, regret, longing, and even humility rise to the surface. When he cannot escape these feelings, he begins to understand their origin. He recalls moments when he acted selfishly, spoke harshly, or remained passive when action was required. The mind pairs these memories with genuine emotion, creating a feedback loop that encourages insight. Emotional accountability is not instantaneous. It is cumulative, forming through repetition, reflection, and recognition over days and weeks. Interestingly, emotional accountability also fosters empathy. As he reviews his actions in silence, he starts imagining your perspective, the things he overlooked, the sacrifices you made, the patience you offered. Without judgment from you, without confrontation, he begins to feel the consequences of his behavior through his own awareness. Silence becomes a teacher, and the lessons are subtle but profound. He learns that accountability is not about punishment. It is about connection, connecting the past with understanding and the present with growth. This accountability shapes not only self-awareness, but future behavior. Once he internalizes the lessons revealed in quiet, he starts adjusting his patterns. He notices moments when he can act differently, respond more thoughtfully, and engage with more honesty. The mind rewires itself, gradually integrating insight into behavior. Emotional accountability in solitude becomes the foundation for genuine transformation because it is not motivated by fear, shame, or external pressure. It is motivated by clarity, reflection, and recognition of truth. Ultimately, these quiet moments create a new standard for him. He begins to understand that relationships, respect, and trust are not things to take for granted. They require attention, care, and presence. Emotional accountability, born in silence, allows him to see where he failed, what he needs to repair within himself, and how to grow beyond the patterns that once limited him. Day by day, reflection transforms into responsibility, and absence, paradoxically, becomes the catalyst for becoming a better version of himself. The final truth in this journey of absence and silence is that transformation is gradual. Change does not happen in dramatic moments or sudden realizations. It does not arrive with a single conversation or a single act of regret. Instead, it unfolds slowly, imperceptibly, like the steady erosion of stone by water. Each quiet day, each moment of reflection, each replay of memory, and each confrontation with the ego contributes to a cumulative shift in thought, perception, and understanding. The process is invisible in real time, but its effects are undeniable over days, weeks, and months. Each day brings a small adjustment. The mind learns to pause before reacting, to consider consequences it once ignored. Patterns that once seemed permanent begin to dissolve, replaced by awareness. He may notice himself thinking differently about situations, recalling memories with insight rather than just nostalgia, or responding to people with more patience. These are subtle shifts that do not announce themselves, but they quietly reshape his character. Daily reflection, repetition, and introspection form the scaffolding for long-term transformation, laying the groundwork for the person he is becoming, whether he realizes it in the moment or not. Consistency is the hidden power of change. While the brain initially resists absence and silence, repetition enforces rewiring. Every day without distraction is a day the mind practices resilience. Every pause in thought, every acknowledgement of past mistakes, every confrontation with discomfort strengthens the pathways that support growth. Unlike dramatic change that can feel fleeting or performative, this slow process ensures that transformation is durable. It is in the accumulation of small realizations and conscious decisions that lasting change is built. Moreover, daily change reshapes perception. Each quiet day allows him to see nuances he once overlooked. Patterns of behavior, emotional triggers, and relational dynamics become clearer. He begins connecting cause and effect in ways that would have been impossible in the noise of presence. These small, incremental insights compound over time, producing a shift not only in thought, but in understanding and perspective. Change becomes less about what was lost and more about what is learned. Absence teaches patience, silence teaches awareness, and together they teach evolution. Daily change also reinforces accountability and responsibility. He recognizes that transformation is not an event to be achieved, but a practice to be maintained. Each moment of reflection and each pause for self-examination strengthens his capacity to respond thoughtfully in future interactions. He begins to carry the lessons learned from absence into the present, reshaping how he treats himself and others. By internalizing this discipline over time, change becomes permanent, not performative. It grows like roots beneath the surface, unseen but strong. Finally, the power of daily change lies in its inevitability. He cannot control the pace, and he cannot rush the process. The mind and heart operate on their own timetable, learning through repetition, reflection, and recognition. But as each day passes, the transformation becomes more apparent. Gradually, subtly, inevitably, the person who once resisted, avoided, and rationalized begins to evolve. He becomes someone who understands, someone who listens, someone who grows not because he was forced to, but because absence, silence, and reflection reshaped him day by day. Change is not sudden. It is relentless, patient, and quietly unstoppable. And so what begins as absence becomes a teacher. What feels like emptiness transforms into space for growth. Silence, once feared, becomes a mirror, reflecting truths he could not face before. Memories, once background noise, now speak clearly. The ego, once rigid, slowly softens. Emotional accountability emerges, not through confrontation, but through the quiet insistence of reflection. And change, real, lasting change, arrives not all at once, but day by day, subtle and unstoppable. This is the power of what happens when someone disappears. The mind rewires, the heart adjusts, and the soul learns lessons that no words could teach. Nothing is lost that cannot be transformed. Every pause, every quiet moment, every crack in pride is an invitation to growth. Absence does not diminish him. It sharpens him, shapes him, and prepares him for a life that is fuller, wiser, and stronger. And one day, without notice, he will emerge, not the same person who feared your absence, but someone who understands the depth of reflection, the strength of accountability, and the unstoppable force of transformation. Day by day, silence does its work. And when that work is complete, he is ready, not because he had to be, but because he chose in the quiet to become more than he was before.